You're listening to the First Fight Podcast, home of the people and stories behind the fight. I'm Jennifer Anderson, the host and creator. My goal is to give you a peek into the remarkable world of fighting and create a platform for fighters to tell their stories. In each episode of this series, a different fighter shares a transformative story of their first time. Welcome back, everyone. This week's episode, I have on Gerald Meerschaert. Gerald is one of my original guests, and he's back on to talk a little bit about his experience on the regional circuit and coming up in MMA. He is a Titan veteran, RFA King of the Cage, former RFA champ. He currently holds the most submission wins in the UFC for the middleweight division, and he overall has at least 49 recorded MMA fights. So Gerald has a lot of experience and a lot of good stories and insight to share. So I hope you all enjoy. Okay, and we're back with another episode with a good friend of mine, Gerald Meerschaert. Gerald actually is one of the original guests on the First Fight when I first started just doing video recordings, but you are a UFC veteran and you are just overall fight game veteran. You have been in it forever. I think before you even got called up to the UFC, you already had, 40 fights?
I think my first UFC fight was my 30th recorded professional fight, if I remember correctly.
Oh my gosh. So you were kind of an outlier, I would say. You got in after, usually I feel like fighters kind of get in around their 10 fight mark, but you have a lot more experience and a lot of experience on the regional circuit. And today I kind of want to talk about what it's like coming up on the regional scene. A lot of people see the bright lights of the UFC, which is kind of, the most well-known promotion for MMA, but there's a lot of gritty little local shows that people have to fight on before they get there. You have a ton of experiences, I'm sure. You've been around, so share a little bit of that with me.
Yeah, so definitely a lot different now than it used to be. I started fighting in 2007, and at that time, the UFC was definitely getting a little more mainstream, but there were still not a ton of set ways to get into the UFC yet. There were some, but now you have if you win an LFA belt, if you win a CFFC belt, that's pretty much like one guaranteed stepping stone, or at least a way to get a shot on, now they have Dana White Contender Series. It'll set you up for something like that, right? And, with social media being even, not that it wasn't popular then, but it's way more popular now. Getting a big following or having done some other sport or some other sort of athletics coming up through, especially the school system, to get you that notoriety definitely helps a lot. And like you said, nowadays it's more like they're looking for 5-0, 7-0, 10-0 guys, almost like a kind of a boxing model in the sense that they want to bring people in that have a good looking record initially. And then once you get in, if you perform, doesn't matter as much. But when I started doing it, I had no previous background in wrestling or any other kind of, regulated sport really. So I didn't have that wealth of experience. So I kind of had to get it all fighting. And on the regional scene then, like I said, there were some still notable shows, RFA was probably around still, LFC was around, but you had to know the right people and travel a little bit more, and it wasn't quite as common. And Fight Pass wasn't around yet. So there wasn't that other thing where people were watching local shows or paying attention. Pretty much you had to go on ShareDog or Bloody Elbow or something, or mixedmartialarts.com. So I got started on a show called Freestyle Combat Challenge. And that was my first 10 fights. And that one actually, a little bit before I got on there, they would kind of team up with the American Top Team. And I forget their show they had down there, but they would always fly guys up, to Memorial Hall to fight on our show. We'd fly guys down to fight in Florida and fight on their show. So they had some really tough guys come through on those shows, like some UFC guys. And that's actually how my one of my original coaches, Nick Aguilar, he knew Dean Thomas, like kind of from that stuff. But like I said, when I started, no regulations, so I don't think I think the first actual weigh-in I went to was like my fifth or sixth fight or something, and I fought a guy that came over from Japan, and like they actually wanted us to weigh in because they had real managers and shit. But every time before that, I was like, oh, hey, like, because I knew of weigh-ins from watching the UFC. I was like, when are weigh-ins? We're like, oh, just come on the day of the fight and we'll weigh in there. And they never did. They just kind of like, you guys are about the same size. We're just going to say it's at this weight. And then you go, hey. So that was one major difference. And also none of the medicals had to be done. But at the place we were at, it was an old like ballroom, like a little concert hall, and upstairs is some like building in downtown Kenosha, Wisconsin. And our warm-up area was just, there's no mats. There's just like the marble floor in the back area, like behind this bar. It was like an L shape. And everywhere else was like seating in like, you know, the concert area. And we had a ring at the time. There was no cage. It was just a ring. It was in a ballroom. So like you would warm up and see your opponent. Maybe, I think, you know, the max you could be away from each other is like 20 feet warming up too. Like there was no locker rooms. There was just one big warm-up area. And that was, you know, what you had to deal with is like, you can see, not that it would matter that much anyway, but for the entirety of the show, unless you wanted to be in a sea of drunk people in Wisconsin, you had to sit in the back with your opponent just kind of like hanging out like, all right, I guess we'll fight each other in like an hour.
Well, those experiences have to help a lot with like your mental toughness, because I think one of the hardest parts about fighting is like being mentally prepared. Like, oh, the fight might fall through. You might change opponent. Like you're always having to like transition your mindset and kind of flip the switch. And when you have experiences like that, it probably becomes a lot easier.
Oh yeah. Yeah. I've had, especially on those shows, I've had warm up in the same room. I've had, you know, day of the fight opponent change, like, you know, almost as I'm walking out, like, by the way, you're fighting this guy now. I'm like, all right. I would not know who I was fighting until I got there, and they would just kind of point and like, I think that's the guy I'm fighting. But I didn't know sometimes until I stepped in the ring, and I was like, all right, I guess me and him are fighting. And yeah, I had seen guys opponent like I know for sure I went to at least one fight I thought I was supposed to fight, and the guy backed out. And then I've shown up to a fight that they had where I wasn't planning on fighting at all. And I show up and they're like, hey, you want to fight this guy? And I'm like, okay. And it's just on the spot, get ready to go. So it was like a habit. You just always brought your gear with you for some of these smaller ones. And yeah, most of them were there. And then on that same show, when they started moving around a little bit after, I don't know, this is still before Wisconsin was regulated, but they happened to like, we had one at a high school, which happened once, and I think they didn't know like exactly what we were doing, because at this point, you know, like UFC rules, you can't soccer kick or stomp people. Well, we could soccer kick, we could stop, we could knee the head of a grounded opponent, and we could throw elbows. Pretty much we could do literally anything but headbutts and groin strikes. So I don't think the high school knew that, because they had tough man competitions, and I think they thought it was going to be something like that. And I literally fought some like short, fat trucker guy who like thought he was tough, and I like soccer kicked him in the mouth in front of his wife and his brother. And and like, I think the high school administrators were like, this isn't at all what we thought it was going to be. Like, you guys can't come back here, because it only ever happened one time, and that was it. That time we actually did have separate locker rooms, because, you know, we had the whole school facility. And then they had fights at a ice rink a couple times, which was awful because they didn't take the ice off. Like, they just put the ring literally on top of the freaking ice. So it was like 40 degrees and you're trying to fight. Like, no sweat, no nothing. You're getting tight. Like, that was terrible. But yeah, all those were some wild times. There was one time that I weighed in not fighting the Japanese guy, because the Japanese guys, it was funny because there was only those three guys that were fighting, and their opponents weighed in. and there was 10 fights on the card. Nobody else weighed in. And then the one other time there was a quote unquote weigh in, and I think it was just to like drum up business for one of the sponsors. So they're like, yeah, come to this whatever, like it was like a Route 66 style like bar and restaurant. And they were like, yeah, be here at this time. So I was like, oh, we're actually going to have an official weigh-in. So I show up there, and there's like nobody there. And then they had like some scale. I don't even know how accurate it was, but I never even stepped on it. And like the guy that was running was like, hey, come over. He called his buddy. He's like, hey, pick him up once. What do you think he weighs? 170 pounds? He's like, yeah. He's like, all right, yeah, you're good. And I was like, oh, this is actually terrifying. Like, yeah, like hopefully I'm the one getting the advantage here, but I have no freaking idea.
Well, you know, our mutual friend Rick Glenn is one of the reasons why I did this in the first place, because his story was so funny about his first fight. And it was similar conditions, you know, changing in a bathroom stall, like less than a day's notice. Just people don't know what it's really like on that local circuit. And
No.
Thomas and I actually, when I interviewed him recently, talked about like the difference between the old school and the new school and the pros and the cons. Do you think that kind of grittiness and I guess the mindset of being down, like being happy that you can fight for a living, and compared to the kids, you know, there's this whole new generation of fighters now that have been training for MMA, and they got a pretty much straight path to the UFC thanks to like their local promotions or whatever connections they have with their gym. But what do you think's better, the old school mindset or the new school kind of streamlined training? And
I think it's hard to say if one's better. I mean, time will tell, right? But it's kind of hard to look at too, because it's different circumstances. Almost anything in human existence, especially sports, generally speaking, is going to improve over time because you've already been doing it for so long. And, you know, as the guys get older that have done it, they can teach the younger guys who learn it earlier, who implement those things, who then make changes for the better, and it goes on and on. One thing, though, I have noticed is, like, there are a lot more athletes that get into MMA. Because before, you know, even if you were an athlete, you had to be a fighter. Like,
well, that's the difference, right? It's
right.
Not a sport. That's where it doesn't go the same direction, I think, as other sports. Like, obviously, it's good that MMA is it has evolved and become more popular, but that fighting spirit is kind of, you can't manufacture that sometimes.
Right, yeah. And I mean, some of it is on, like, the coaches and stuff too, but that's the thing. Anytime that more money gets into something, the guys that are more naturally athletic, if they see that, you know, if you have all the physical gifts, you're going to go where you think you can make the most money, or what you have the most fun doing and can make the most money. I think anyone that really gets into MMA and sticks with it, you know, either all their athleticism does not translate to other sports, or they like probably actually do enjoy fighting to an extent, but there are definitely guys that you can categorize as either an athlete or either a fighter. There are athletic fighters, and there are some athletes who have fight in them, but I think generally speaking, you're going to fit into one of those two categories until you get to the top, and then, you know, guys can probably be a little bit of both. But that's like something I noticed personally, like, you know, younger guys coming up now, they want everything to be like the UFC. And even these local shows, they want to be the UFC, which is fine. But like, that doesn't mean you should expect to be treated like you're a UFC caliber fighter. It's like, oh, I wanted this song, or like, what the heck? I can't work in these conditions, basically kind of like the same old stuff you hear all older guys saying, like, you kids are soft and you don't know how good you have and blah, blah, blah. I think some of that is true because I've heard anecdotally like, oh, well, they didn't have this or whatever. It's like, man, I went down to fight George Lockhart, who was on a season of The Ultimate Fighter. And I fought him, like, he's from Atlanta, and I fought him around that area. and like we fought in a bar or something, and I had to warm up like literally in like the storeroom closet for the kitchen. You know what I'm saying? Like the cage we fought in broke after the third heavyweight fight before we fought. Like, I don't want to hear shit about like they didn't have waters or like guys show up without wraps and gauze and stuff. I'm like, guys, if you want to be like, obviously the UFC, they provide so much stuff for us. You know, Bellator, the same thing. All these bigger promotions, they provide everything to streamline the thing to make the true professional athletes make our job easier. But the local shows, it's not their job. And you got to understand, like, if you were a carpenter, you showed up to a job site without a hammer, that's on you. Like, you got to bring your own tools. So, like, having some accountability and just being an adult about it, you know, and like you said, being able to roll with the punches, right? Because there's a lot of times, like, I showed up, I knew who I was fighting, but it's like, the cage broke, you know, we're in like a dusty fucking closet. I can't do any sort of grappling warm-ups. It's me and Scott Cushman, so like he can hold pads for me, but that's it. Like I'm not going to grapple with him or anything. So I can kind of shadow wrestle a little bit. But I've been doing this for so long. It's like, if you're truly a fighter, you'll make do with what you have. And you can't obsess about what you don't have because it's not going to help you in the fight anyway. It's like, look, you know what you know. Do whatever you got to do to break a sweat, do some sprints, whatever it is. Like, once you lock up and you start punching each other in the mouth, it doesn't really matter where you warmed up. I promise, like, would it be nice to always have, like, oh, I got a wall to drill on for this specific technique? It'd be nice, yeah, but, like, if you've been doing it your whole camp, it doesn't really fucking matter. Just get your ass in there and fight.
Hey, listen, we deal with that all the time out in Jersey. There's so much talent and, like, I've never seen so many like talented young men and just great facilities, great coaches, amazing local promotion, excuse me, that's on Fight Pass. Like these kids have no idea. I've heard of like this one kid like complaining. He was trying to get the promotion, a local promotion, not even like CFFC, a smaller promotion, to pay for his hotel room as an amateur. I'm like, they're not going to pay. Who are you? Like, they don't care. It's right. Part of culture in fighting, I think. That's good and bad. It's bad because I feel like fighters don't demand a lot for themselves because they're usually just happy to fight. They're happy to make a living fighting. But also now there's like this whole kind of softness throughout. Like, are you able to overcome any, setbacks? Someone pokes you in the eye. Are you going to stop and be like, I can't fight? Or, it's just a different mindset. The old school, I feel like, has more of the mindset of like, whatever it happens, I'm prepared to deal with that situation to win,
Yeah.
But I feel like are a prime
perfect example that like Oh yeah, no, and like my first UFC fight, it was on Fight Pass. I was the 8th fight on the lineup for whatever reason, and we didn't have a walkout. Like I didn't have a walkout until my second UFC fight because and this still doesn't make sense to me. And like I don't know, it was live, but it was on Fight Pass, so it's like there's no TV or anything but what the UFC is showing. But they insisted that it was taking too long because I'm fight number 8. First 7 fights have gone to decision. They walked me and my opponent in our corners out cage side during the last round of the fight before us. And it goes to decision. So we're out there for like, I think they let the round start and then they walked us out. We're standing cage side for like, 3-4 minutes. No entrance, no nothing. Walk us in there, get us set, and then boom, start introductions right away. And I honestly don't even know if they did introductions. They might have just walked us in there and then like started fighting. But like for me, it was like, I'm used to this kind of stuff. Like I don't care. So like had no effect on me whatsoever. And I feel like there's a lot of guys who maybe were like, would be nervous, like, oh, now I got to sit here and I'm getting cooled off and blah, blah, blah. When it's like, you can't obsess about things you can't control. What you can control is like, regulate your breathing, stay focused, and just understand that like, when the cage door shuts and, they say fight, that's when you got to be on. And, like I've, my first, well, and I always say this, I never fought knowingly as an amateur. I do actually have an amateur fight. I forgot about this, but all my fights, A, they were pro, and B, like, I know I'm a fighter for two reasons. One, I'm not really athletic, and two, I started fighting for gym dues, which is something you shouldn't do anyway, but like I didn't know any better, and they're like, oh, well, you fight for us for free, and then you can train for free. And I was like, okay. Like I didn't, and that's like full open rules, all the stuff I do, like soccer kicks, stomps, and knees, the head of a grounded opponent, all that stuff. I was like, all right, cool. I want to do this. I'm down. And, luckily I was close enough to the venue. They didn't have to give me a hotel or anything, but that was just how it was. And, nobody told me any different.
Well, you got that for sure.
That made me think.
Fight IQ, I feel like it's really served you well. You're not always the most athletic, explosive fighter, but you've been managed. Kind of reminds me of like Glover has really used his grappling in times where he's been hurt and flipped the script in the fight, and you're very good at doing that. Like you can weather the storm if things get bad, and it's served you well in your career, and I've always enjoyed watching you fight, and I'm looking forward to the next era.
Yeah,
when is the next fight? It's coming up.
August 13th, I'm fighting Bruno Silva.
August 13th. I'm excited. It seems like the dad power has come to you and seem to be performing well since you've become a father. So
yeah.
I'll be looking forward to your next fight, and I enjoy you sharing your stories. Hopefully some of the younger fighters can listen to some of this and maybe take a few cues from a veteran like you.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I appreciate it. It's always fun talking.
Thanks again to Gerald for taking the time to share some of his stories and insights. I know you probably have a lot more, and we could talk forever, but you can watch Gerald Saturday, August 13th, fighting against Bruno Silva. He'll be on the UFC Fight Night Vera vs. Cruz. So check him out there. Good luck, Gerald, and thanks again, everyone else. Have a great day.